Welcome into the Blogger Bowl Week 10 recap. Week 11 early lines, and Dan's got a Notre Dame shirt on. I didn't think that day would ever come, but Daniel is wearing a Notre Dame shirt. I'm wearing a Notre Dame hoodie. I will be a man of – I'll be accountable. I'll hold myself accountable. Our Vols, me and Phil's Vols, my Vols did not take care of business this week, but never made it. The Vols were my adopted team. I'm still going to root for them. I still think there's a shot for a playoff bid. We'll kind of get into that at some point. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish saved their season. They saved all of our seasons by keeping Clemson out of the playoff. They saved my Saturday night. Actually, they shouldn't say that. The wedding I was at was lovely. Congratulations to my lovely cousin Christina, but they saved my Saturday night. And what a weekend in college football we got. I don't know where you want to start. We probably have to start. We may probably go chronologically because that makes the most sense. But first off, Dan, I've just been talking. How you doing on this Tuesday? Thank you for wearing the shirt. That's very big of you.
Yeah, so I bought the Home Field Big New Saturday subscription. It's a great shirt. So here's the thing. Being a fat guy actually worked out in my favor because this was not the Home Field subscription shirt for Notre Dame. It was campus basketball tournament. There's
I know what you're talking about.
Whatever that is was a subscription shirt. It was cool, but it was like a gray shirt, whatever. But because I'm a big dude, I got this one instead, and I love this shirt. Like, it's green and gold. We'll save the Notre Dame thoughts for later.
We'll get to it. I got love
the green and gold.
We'll probably get to it also Thursday because when Phil joins us, Phil's also going to have to get his say in on it too. That's just not my.
He's not allowed to.
He will.
He can't set aside the work schedule to show up on Tuesdays.
If you're going to ask Phil about the family,
if providing for his family is more important than showing up and talking ball with you and me on Tuesdays, then that's that. We move on. We don't look back.
We're going to kick things off on Thursday, asking Phil about Alabama, Ole Miss, and Phil's just going to go on a 10-minute speech about Notre Dame, Clemson.
Speaking of miss, what a miss for Clemson against Notre Dame. Speaking of before we'll start with the Georgia game, but before we do that, we tend to be hyperbolic with college football and everything's the greatest thing we've ever seen and everything's the biggest thing we've ever seen. But this weekend, legitimately, I think if you
pretty great weekend of football.
It was a great weekend of football. It was also one of the most cataclysmic weeks in college football we've had in a long time. When you consider the fact that in the history of the college football playoff, Alabama's been 7 times, Clemson's been 6 times, Ohio State's been 4 times, Oklahoma's been 4 times, and Georgia and Notre Dame are the only other teams that have been multiple times. And we knew after the TCU game, Oklahoma, they're a ways away from being a title contender again. But, Alabama and Clemson, the 2 teams who have the most appearances in the college football playoff, are out of playoff consideration in all likelihood. Obviously things it's been
There's
a weird
short windows for both, but
right. I've talked about how I won't get into hashtag scenario season, but the caveat to that was the fact that I just anticipated Alabama and Clemson finding their ways into the playoff potentially. And those teams are not going to be in the playoff probably. So now there's a lot on the table. I don't know. I didn't really write them down and want to get super into scenario season today, but there's a lot out there. Although I think the most fascinating one to me is a little bit dead. I actually needed Alabama to lose and Clemson to win because I'm fine with it. Trust me, I'm fine with it. But the most interesting scenario to me would have been Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson. I mean, I guess TCU running the table will help this as well. But is basically a no doubt 3 undefeated Power 5 conference champions, 1, 2, and 3, and then 1 loss Oregon and 1 loss Tennessee, the debate to see who gets to play Georgia again.
So, and I'm going to throw also into that debate if 1 loss Michigan or 1 loss Ohio State.
That's a whole nother discussion. Okay. That's a whole this one specific scenario to me where the committee would have to choose between a team that Georgia
they picked the SEC
points, in all likelihood, but it would be an interesting discussion. So that's what we're missing out on. But just an absolutely transformative week in college football. And we'll kind of talk about where Alabama and Clemson are headed next. But we start with the big game of the weekend. We start with the most watched college football game of the entire season to the surprise of literally nobody. And it speaks to how hyped this game was. It was the most watched game. And it was not close. The final score, Georgia 27, Tennessee 13, is not emblematic of what this game was. This was as one-sided as we expected. This was a welcome to the big boys club for Tennessee. I am being 100% genuine when I say I think it's the nicest compliment that you could give Josh Heupel in Tennessee for where their program is now compared to where it was 2 years ago, that this was the game where Georgia decided to stop playing with their food. Like Georgia, they were not dialed in for the Florida game. They were not.
At all.
Even
no,
when
they were
looking
looking
at
at
that game. They were sloppy as hell in that game. They were sloppy against Kent State. They were sloppy against Missouri. Like, this is a team that has been inconsistent all year at times. And it was evident that on Saturday, Georgia was just kind of had another level that nobody really has. The crowd clearly had an effect on this game. Tennessee committed 8 pre-snap penalties. The biggest surprise to me, Georgia able to consistently get pressure on Hendon Hooker, which up till now had not been a strength of the Georgia defense, but it really affected him, and it was largely responsible for his ability to hit a deep ball. I think he took 4 deep shots and missed on every single one of them. Georgia's defense, just impressive in how fundamentally sound they are and how well coached they are. They don't miss a line often, and Kirby was smart enough right before the end of the third quarter.
Kirby was smart enough.
They were. That's good. I like it. It was not even intentional. That was not even intentional.
That was good.
But it was right before the end of the third quarter, and he realized they were misaligned, and he called a timeout so that they could get set properly so that they would not give up a big play there. Just really smart on his part. They also do not miss tackles. Their whole game plan was, we're going to play man coverage, and we're going to press your receivers and get them off of their line, but we're also going to make you throw short. And Tennessee did, and I don't remember Georgia missing any tackles. I tweeted it this morning. Georgia, and some of these guys probably just played special teams, but nevertheless, 8 of the guys who played on defense in this game for Georgia played in the national championship. So we probably overestimated the impact of losing the guys Georgia had on defense. Now, they don't have 5 guys who are going to go in the first round, I don't think, from this defense. So they've gone from like historic to merely just like very, very good on defense this year. And they were spectacular. And then on offense, they got their longest pass play to a wide receiver, 52 yards to Arian Smith. A few other chunk plays, ran the ball well enough. And by and large, Stetson Bennett, the fourth, after what was either his first or second throw that a Tennessee defender dropped, was pretty flawless the rest of the game. Ran one in. Georgia 7 of 12 on third down. Tennessee was 2 of 14 on third down. And my last note, we have to give a shout out to how complete was this domination by Georgia. You even have to give some love to their punter, Brett Thorson, who hit maybe the greatest punt I've ever seen in my life. You know how, like in baseball, like the Jordan Alvarez home run in the World Series, you know how like a good home run, you just know from the sound.
Yeah. Punt, same way.
That was what it was with this punt. You heard it and you're like, holy shit, he just punted the hell out of that ball. 75 yards out at the 1. Thor has his Mjolnir and it's his right leg. Matt, I know the Vols are your guys. I've talked a lot. What were your thoughts?
Tennessee was definitely outclassed in this game, but I think Georgia, if they play that way, outclasses any other team in the country. That was, you talk about in sports all the time, when can a team, if people talk about the hypothetical switch and when teams can flip it, if teams can flip that switch, like the Patriots all those years. That was Georgia flipping the switch. I think you used the term playing with their food. Georgia been playing with their food most of the year. They finally flipped the switch. They just absolutely dominated Tennessee. It was not as close as the score. And I think what we learned is Tennessee is still a very good football team. I still think they have a path to a playoff bid. Like I said, I still think they will probably win out and look pretty good doing so. I think they're still as electric on offense as just about anybody in the country. What they're missing, I think, is the big boys up front. And Georgia has those. Georgia has had those for a while. And that's usually when you have the skill, when you're equal in terms of skill players. I think Tennessee's skill players match up okay with Georgia's. It's who's going to win the battle up front. What we saw is that's kind of the last place Tennessee still needs to improve consistently to get to the next level that they want to get to. Georgia's there. Georgia's been there for a very long time. They were all in Hendon Hooker's face. Tennessee's defense played okay up against the run, but they did not generate the same pass rush they were able to against Alabama. And we saw them kind of crumble on a road test, inexperienced up front. And Georgia absolutely took advantage of it and dominated. If we see that Georgia team will not lose to another team in college football. If they play like that, I'm not sure there's a team maybe if Ohio State plays a perfect game offensively, but that's about it. Because if you talk about Michigan, if Michigan plays their best offensively, they're not going to still be able to run the ball consistently against Georgia. Tennessee, obviously, we saw Alabama's out of the playoff. TCU, no, like Georgia, that's the best team in college football right there, and it's not very close.
Yeah, Ohio State would have their offensive line in particular would have to play to a level that's a little bit higher than we've seen from them in recent weeks against good defenses for me to really think they'd have a chance in that game. Their defense is better than Tennessee's. There's a handicapper, a guy who does a lot of college football betting in the social space too, who put out He said he's betting Tennessee 20 or 25-1 to win the national title. And his argument was if they make the playoff, they're not going to be the 4 seed, which I disagree with, and they'd only have to play Georgia once. But my thing is, like, there was nothing fluky about that game at all. Like, the only thing about what happened on Saturday that's probably not repeatable if these two teams do meet again in the playoff is I don't think Tennessee is going to commit that number of pre-snap penalties on a neutral field. But there was nothing fluky about it. Georgia was just so well prepared to play that game, so well coached in that game, and they were dominant end to end. And I'm with you. Like, Georgia's best is better than anybody else's best that we've seen. I still hold out hope, and maybe it's foolish just because I'm sitting on a 13-1 parlay with Ohio State as the last leg, that the Buckeyes could put it all together if they get healthy.
That's the team that can. We haven't seen it yet.
Exactly. So an impressive win for them. Before we move on, shout out to PJ Walker in the chat, who has been a regular the last couple of weeks in the deep dive chat. He's here for the Temple Owls talk. Shout out to the Temple Owls, who scored over 50 points and got Jeff Scott fired at USF. So shout out.
Been a long time coming there.
They've been waiting for a long time. Shout out to Stan Drayton, former Texas running backs coach, who's the head coach there at Temple. Moving on, the other cataclysmic result of the week. That's my word of the day. LSU 32, Alabama 31. Alabama is dead. No, I'm just kidding.
Not really.
Kind of funny.
They're still probably okay.
Kind of funny how people want to write those think pieces at this point, but I have a lot of thoughts on this game. One, about the game itself. Two, about where Alabama is right now. I'll go with my thoughts on the game first and then let you take it from there with your thoughts before I go kind of overarching. I went back and I rewatched Alabama's offense on Sunday morning, and a few things stood out to me. Kirk Herbstreit the entire game is talking about how Bryce Young and the receivers are out of sync. Like, he's blaming the problems that Alabama had on Bryce Young being out of sync with his receivers. I didn't see it, man. Bryce Young just played a bad game. It's like we're afraid to admit that Bryce Young, who I think is the best quarterback in college football, played a bad game. Great quarterbacks play bad games. Patrick Mahomes is the greatest quarterback I think I've ever seen play the sport of football from a talent and ability standpoint. He has bad games. Josh Allen was terrible on Sunday against the Jets before he hurt himself, and those are the elite guys in the NFL. Bryce Young just played a bad game. Now, part of that was because their offensive line was also bad in this game, and there's something about Bryce Young that intrigues me on the negative side as a prospect at the next level. Have you ever seen him stand next to Nick Saban?
He's small.
He's so
small.
And I don't care about frame necessarily. I legitimately think can't be much taller than Kyler Murray, and he's not the athlete Kyler Murray is. And LSU did a great job pushing the pocket up the middle. And I just don't know that Bryce Young can see over big offensive linemen. He kind of throws the ball to spots and expects his receivers to be there, and they just weren't. He had trouble getting in rhythm because he was pressured all night. And Alabama, again, they don't have a deep play threat, which allows the defenses to play closer to the line of scrimmage. They outgained them by about 100 yards, but the interception in the end zone, like their red zone offense, was atrocious. And we know that there's rumors that it was some sort of NIL deal that got Harold Perkins to decommit from Texas A&M to go to LSU, which is interesting that A&M couldn't pony up the money when they were paying for everyone else. Harold Perkins was the best player on the field in that game. That kid is a monster, a freshman linebacker for LSU. He was awesome. And I mean, I'll maybe transition and talk about LSU at the very, very end of this, but we know Brian Kelly can coach. But before I get into my overarching thoughts about Alabama, what did you see in this game?
So this was unfortunately on while I was at the wedding, so I saw bits and pieces of it, but it kind of seemed like, because obviously we still had our phones on after dinner and all that stuff. We weren't not watching football sometimes. I mean, it seemed like what we talked about. Bryce Young kind of had to do it all, and against Texas he was able to do it all, and some other big games this year he was able to do it all and will his team to a win. And in this one, it caught up to him. He, like you said, he didn't have himself the best night. And for whatever reason, this Alabama class of receivers and playmakers on the outside is not what we're used to. There is no Jamison Williams. There's no John Mechie. There's no Devontae Smith. Not really even close to that. And LSU kind of knew it. And they made Bryce Young play a perfect game. He didn't. And LSU is a good enough football team, and Brian Kelly's a good enough coach to have that team ready to play. And basically, if Saban not Saban, Bryce Young was able to play his best football game, they were probably going to win that football game, and he didn't. And credit to Bryce Young, still willed him back, still got him to overtime, still was great when he had to be late, but it just wasn't enough because they don't have. It's so weird to say, and we've said it all year on this podcast, really since the Texas game. Alabama just doesn't have the dudes on the outside, and it's very, very strange to watch. And everybody wants to claim the dynasty is over and ding dong, the witch is dead and all that. I'm really not going to say that. I believe Alabama is either number one or number 10, the number one or number two recruiting class next year, depending where you're going to look. They're going to get dudes. Nick Saban's going to adapt because that's what he does. I know the recruiting landscape's changing. He'll figure that out, and they'll probably be right back in 2 or 3, next year, a year or two, being the best team in the country up there with Georgia. They're just going to be a little more susceptible to we're calling this a down year. They're a knuckleball kick away and a illegal pick play on an extra point, which is fine. Like I wouldn't have thrown the flag either, though I wish they would have not thrown that flag when Brian Kelly was coaching Notre Dame at Florida State a couple of years ago. That's neither here nor there. But like in a ding dong Alabama's dead year, they have 2 losses. They're dead because of a knuckleball kick on the road that was deflected in an illegal pick play. Like they're that close to being number 1 in the country. Are they as good of a team as Georgia? No, but they're that close to still being a playoff team and probably in a national championship game.
I'm glad that's where you ended that, because that sets me up perfectly for what I wanted to talk about. Alabama, like you said, they have those 2 close losses. But at the same time, Alabama could have lost to Texas, could have lost to Texas A&M. This is a team that could be 9-0. This is a team that could be 5-4. So 7-2 is exactly fair for where Alabama is right now. They're living within the margins the way they never have before under Nick Saban. They don't have any receivers that scare you, let alone the first-round talent at the position they've basically had every year since Julio Jones first got there in 2009. 8 first-round draft picks at the receiving position, starting with Julio Jones. They had 2 go in the first round in 2020, 2 go in the first round in 2021, and then a first-rounder and a second-rounder last year. They just don't have that right now, and it's point-blank period there. They also haven't developed the talent in the secondary. You can use extra guys in pass protection to keep the rush off the quarterback and still throw the ball on them. They also don't have the dominant offensive line we're used to seeing from Alabama. The talent is there because it's Alabama. We know how well they recruit, but they have not developed the talent the way Alabama normally does at the positions they need it the most. So instead of being national championship caliber, Alabama is merely a top 10 team in college football and way behind the elite team, which just so happens to be right now their biggest recruiting threat in their conference, Georgia. They're good. If you were to tell me Alabama could beat anybody in the country except for Georgia, I'd believe that. Could Alabama conceptually beat Ohio State and Michigan? Sure. Would I bet on them to do that? Probably not right now because of the flaws that they have on their roster, but it's jarring to see. And I've seen some people suggesting that maybe Nick Saban might end up walking away after this year. And I don't know if I buy that. Another thing, like the turnover at coordinator and at position coach, like it's eventually going to catch up to. It took 16 years, but it finally has caught up to Nick Saban. Like I don't think Bill O'Brien is as bad as people think he is, but I think that Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian, at least as play callers, are 2 of the elite play callers in college football, and Bill O'Brien is not that. And when you don't have the elite talent at receiver, it kind of makes it difficult. They just don't scheme people open, but to me, they're not very well coached this year. They just don't look like they're very well coached, which is kind of jarring to see with Alabama.
Yeah, it's just not something we're used to talking about with them. I mean, like you said, I don't buy any rumors that Nick Saban might walk away. He just signed an extension that's, 9 years or whatever, 8 years long. And I don't think that would make sense for him to sign and then walk away ASAP, especially with all that money on the table. I trust him to get it figured out, but we're definitely seeing the gap narrow in terms of where the programs are at. And I'm not quite ready to say it yet, but if Georgia wins the national championship this year, you probably say Georgia's actually the new Alabama. Like they are the elite standard in college football if that happens this year.
I don't think that's fair. Like the hunger that the Alabama program had in those early years under Saban is where Georgia is. And it seems like there's a little bit of malaise with Alabama that they have to figure out. On the other side of it, I don't have much to say other than like we knew Brian Kelly could coach. It's kind of interesting how people have kind of spun the like, everyone said this was a bad cultural fit, like it was a negative. Like, yeah, it's a bad cultural fit, but I think the general consensus was, this is a weird fit, but Brian Kelly's a good coach, and if Les Miles and Ed Orgeron can win there, Brian Kelly's a better coach than those guys. And in year 1, and give him all the credit in the world, they no-showed at home against Tennessee, and they've now been undefeated, and they are playing much better. They were bad in that game, and they used that as an inflection point, and they got better. And now they control their own destiny in the SEC. And so I will ask you a question, and we might have asked this question before, but I'm going to ask it again as it transitions us to our final of the 3 big games. Is it entirely possible that Brian Kelly leaving for LSU and Marcus Freeman getting the Notre Dame job is just one of those best case scenario for everyone involved?
I think it's more than entirely possible. I think that's exactly what we're seeing. I think Brian Kelly, with the way he recruits, and I'm not really trying to knock him, but it's just his reputation is he's a little bit of a lazier recruiter. He doesn't love the grind of recruiting. I think being at a place that recruits itself like LSU is very, very good for him, because he was a fine recruiter at Notre Dame, but if you go back to his classes the last 10 to 15 years, he was really only inside the top 10 like 2 or 3 times. Marcus Freeman comes there, and they have was number 7 class last year. They have the number 3 class this year. Like, you saw those changes immediately. Brian Kelly was good enough to get Notre Dame to a college football playoff, but I think the way he recruited, or lack thereof, was not going to be good enough to get Notre Dame over the hump, because he told you that he would tell anybody who was listening after losses to teams like Alabama in the playoff and stuff like that, basically Notre Dame is hamstrung in the way they can recruit and such and such and such. So in his head, they were not going to get past that hump, which was not a bad place to be as a program. They're still getting to college football playoffs, but I don't think they're ever going to get to that hump. He can overjump it because he is a very, very good football coach. We've known that. Everybody, Notre Dame fans, whether or not they liked him all the time when he was here or not, would tell you he was a very good football coach. He also, what we're seeing now, we saw it at Notre Dame for a very long time, he gets his teams playing best towards the end of the year, building up towards these play. Like, look at, I forgot the stat, but Notre Dame now this year with Freeman in their first game, but dating back to the Kelly years, had won like 11 or something consecutive November games. Like, his teams always get better as the season goes on. Now, they do struggle often early on in seasons. They do tend to have some no-show performances at home. And is he going to be able to get away with those in the SEC against teams like, obviously Tennessee this year, but like in Arkansas or something like that? That's going to be tougher than it was at Notre Dame to get away with, Virginia Tech or Purdue or Ball State. But he's going to put his team in a position in November to win. And I think what you're seeing now with Marcus Freeman, obviously bumps in the road. All first-year head coaches have them, especially when you're taking over a program in as big of a spotlight as Notre Dame, and the spot that it happened, legendary coach leaving, and you have to take over and go viral and become the all-time wins leader at Notre Dame. That's I don't love saying he's a legendary head coach, but he's the all-time wins leader at Notre Dame. You're starting to see Marcus Freeman get his foot in, get his feet wet. He's starting to he's figured out how to be a head coach. He's figuring that out. He's figuring out all the nuances, and he's still recruiting. I mean, they lose to Marshall, they lose to Stanford, they don't lose any recruits. They actually picked up a couple 4-stars. Now they lost Keon Keeley, who's a 5-star. That's going to hurt, but he left for Alabama, and that's just going to happen sometimes. Marcus Freeman is the guy that Notre Dame needs, a special type of recruiter, and if they ever want to be in that top 5, because that place unfortunately doesn't recruit itself to the extent of a Bama or an LSU or Georgia. And I think what we're seeing with Marcus Freeman is he has them in place to get Notre Dame to the next level.
One thing that Brian Kelly did not do very well in his time at Notre Dame was beat top 10 teams. So Notre Dame 35, number 4 Clemson 14. You just talked for a while, so I'll go
for
real
it.
quick.
Marcus Freeman has as many top 5 wins in his 10 years Notre Dame head coach as Brian Kelly.
I will go to let you catch your breath real quick. I don't have a ton to say about Notre Dame, so I'll let you do your Notre Dame gloating in a second. I will say there are 2 things on this that stand out. One, this was entirely predictable from the Clemson offense, and everyone who wants Cade Klubnik to play, dude, like, if Cade Klubnik were ready and were the guy, he'd probably be playing. Like, everyone's like, oh, they got to put Cade in. And it's like, did you watch the Syracuse game? Like, the best thing he did was get hit out of bounds and draw a 15-yard.
They tried in this one. It didn't work.
Yeah, well, on the road, it's not going to work exactly the same way. It's not that he's not talented. It's not that he's not going to be good at some point. We have no idea. It's just like the quarterback situation right now is not great. And I've talked about it time and time again, and I'll talk about it very briefly here. This offense is not very good. They don't have a very good offensive coaching staff. It's not a very experienced offensive coaching staff. They needed new ideas. They didn't do it. So the offense, once again, is stuck in the mud. And I don't care who the quarterback is. The system itself is broken to the point where even if there's a great quarterback there, it's going to be inhibited a little bit by what they're doing. Now that Jeff Scott is back on the market after losing the USF job, would it surprise me if he comes back and takes over that job at Clemson as offensive coordinator again, or maybe they do the co-offensive coordinator thing, whatever. Like, it's possible, and maybe that'll help in the long run, like next year going forward. But the same thing we saw time and time again this year and over the last couple of years with this offense is it's just not very good. It's not very inventive. They don't scheme anybody open. It's not a good scheme. Their offensive line's not great. And that was the case in this game. Now, on the other side of the ball, that was surprising because Notre Dame is not an elite rushing team. Like, Notre Dame came in 48th in success rate rushing and 107th in EPA per rush. So not the most efficient rushing offense. And they just ran Clemson the fuck over in this game. This was big boy football. They just big boyed the shit out of Clemson in this game on both sides of the ball. Dominated them on the defensive line, dominated them on the offensive line. And I know, I think it was Miles Murphy was out. One of the starting defensive linemen.
Xavier, what's the last name?
Thomas.
Yeah, that's
Miles Murphy played. Miles Murphy played. Brisset played. Like, the rest of their 5-star defensive line played, and they no-showed. That has been one of the most disappointing units in the country this year in terms of consistency. But credit to Notre Dame. Like, they showed up. They big boy footballed Clemson out of the national spotlight, and congratulations to them and Marcus Freeman. Matt, take it away.
I mean, you just kind of said it. Notre Dame just big boyed Clemson, and they said, strength on strength, you know what we're going to do, we know what you're going to do, and we're just going to be better than you at it. And they absolutely were. I mean, even in the first quarter, the block punt for a touchdown, we talked about it last week. Notre Dame has blocked 6 punts this year. They blocked 2 against Syracuse. They're sending the house, and I've watched it like 3 or 4 times. The Clemson dude in the middle just doesn't block, just does not block. I think it was Jordan Botelho gets the hand on it. You said Notre Dame's running game has not been all that efficient. It was not early on this year, but as Harry Hiestands back at Notre Dame as the offensive line coach, he is one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. He was there for a couple of the years with Brian Kelly before leaving for the Bears. His first couple of years in his first stint with Notre Dame, though, you saw the same thing. His offensive line got off to a very, very slow start. I think his first 3 games in his first stint, Notre Dame averaged under 100 yards rushing on the ground, and then they kind of got into this rhythm. Notre Dame has 2 stud tackles. They have a very experienced interior offensive line. And the Syracuse game for them, I know they went up against obviously nowhere near the front that Clemson has, an undersized front, but they absolutely, that was a confidence booster for Notre Dame because they saw a smaller defensive front, and just absolutely bullied them. And I think that both built up a lot of confidence. And I think they just knew that Clemson, as talented as they were, was not that much more talented. And up front, I think Notre Dame knew they had the guys in the trenches to compete with them. And that's just what happened. They just bullied them. And you saw, Notre Dame had 2 different 100-yard rushers in Estime and Diggs. And credit to the staff, Audric Estime back-to-back weeks. I think it was the Stanford week. And I'm blanking on the week after that. Whatever. He had 2 back-to-back weeks with fairly important fumbles. The Stanford one kind of didn't really lose them the game, but was on a drive that could have went down and tied it. Syracuse, they just kind of went back to him and said, we need you. You're going to run the football a lot. Don't fumble it anymore. And since then, he hasn't fumbled it anymore, and he has 200-plus yard performances. But they're a very well-coached team, and if they're recruiting some guys that are playmakers on the outside, if they can bring in a transfer portal quarterback and kind of keep reloading on that offensive line, Notre Dame's going to have the dudes to compete with anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it was just an impressive win, and it's a statement win for a program that's
Marcus Freeman needed that because nobody. I think Phil tweeted about it. Like, if you at the beginning of the year knew that you would lose to Marshall, lose to Stanford, but beat the shit out of Clemson, would you take it? Probably. Yeah.
I think in hindsight you can say that now. I don't know. I think you would have wondered, like.
I would wonder what the hell happened.
Like,
knowing what I know now in hindsight, yes, I would take it.
Yeah, I think. Like, bizarre, but a huge win for that program. And I'll say this: if they in a few weeks now, if USC beats UCLA, if Notre Dame
that's going to be a game.
USC out of the playoff contention by beating them, I might buy another Notre Dame shirt.
Talk about, Clemson was strength on strength. That is what a matchup we have with that. Like, USC is going to try and throw for 400. Notre Dame's going to try and run for 400. That's just going to be.
Notre Dame's going to run all over that.
I think that, like you saw what they did to Clemson. It's a road game, obviously different environment, but they did it against Syracuse too, which is, I know, not a great team, but a tough road environment. They're going to go to the Coliseum and they're going to try and run for 300 yards, and they might. And credit Drew Pine, he might be asked to throw like 4 times in that game, but if he completes 3 of them to Michael Mayer, then that'll be just fine.
So
Shout out Michael Mayer, became the Notre Dame tight ends touchdown reception leader in his junior season with 3 games left, which is just insane. I'm going to miss him so much next year.
Not to belittle the accomplishments of anyone in college football, but basically if you set a passing or receiving record in college football for a team or nationally, it's basically just comparing the last like 30 years of football.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because nobody threw the ball before.
Fair, in the last 30 years, though, Notre Dame's had some really good tight ends.
Notre Dame, I mean, it's an amazing accomplishment regardless, and to do it in 3 years is spectacular. I only have a couple of odds and ends this week. Just one game, like we witnessed the most bonkers game of the year in college football. SMU 77, Houston 63.
Love it.
The highest scoring game in regulation in FBS history. Just go look at the drive chart. Absolutely hysterical.
Give Tanner Mordecai the Heisman. Just give it 9 touchdowns in a game. I'm in.
1,352 yards. Mordecai had 9 touchdowns. Clayton Tune had 7. The last time I looked, if you follow us on Twitter, the BetSperts account, I was kind of like updating the live total. The last time I looked, it was 125.5, and it sailed over that. What a nuts game. Shout out, though, to me, the player of the game. And I'm not just saying this because he's a grad transfer from Texas, but shout out to Ryan Bushevsky. Do you know what position Brian Bushevsky plays?
Long snapper.
Close. He's the punter.
Holder. Damn.
He's the punter. 1 punt in this game. And it was by the team that scored 77 points. 1 punt in this game. And I'm sitting here thinking, and he pinned Houston down at the 11. It's like there's been no stops in this game whatsoever. Like there were turnovers on downs and turnovers, but there had been no punts. This guy comes in and he has to do it 1 time in this game, and he nails it. Pins them at the 11. And then Houston goes down and scores a touchdown.
Yeah,
nevertheless. And then also my last note, I guess I'll kind of tie this into a couple of things. Shout out to Brent Pry and Virginia Tech for officially killing my Georgia Tech win total under. Virginia Tech had an 11-point lead in the fourth quarter at home, turned the ball over 3 times, and lost to Georgia Tech. That is a bad team, Virginia Tech. And, like, they don't have any talent. Like, I don't know what Fuente was doing there, and it's going to take them a while, but not a whole lot to believe that they're going to turn things around quickly under Brent Pry. But that killed my under. And shout out to Georgia Tech, who has rebounded since they fired Jeff Collins. Now go out and please hire Jamie Chadwell. Like, Coastal Carolina, they were awesome last year. They're really awesome in 2020 and 2021. Lost a bunch of guys, including like a guy who's going to be a really good NFL player in Isaiah Likely, and they're right back in the Sun Belt mix. I believe they won't clinch the division with their win against App State the other day. Grayson McCall's been banged up a lot, and yet they're still achieving at a really, really high level. So shout out to them off the top of my head. The only other thing I was going to bring up, I'll bring up a little bit later in the odds for the week, but do you have anything else you want to add, or do you want to hop into the list of games that I wrote down?
I'm good. Like I said, I unfortunately did not get to watch a ton of the slate today, so I really just had eyes on the big, or not today, Saturday. Really just kind of had eyes on the big games, which glad I did because those were pretty awesome.
Ohio State looks medium. I mean, there's nothing you can really draw from that, but shout out to Ryan Day, who thought 30-mile-per-hour crosswind, I'm going to throw the ball almost 30 times. Like, that was very Brian Kelly against NC State.
Yeah.
So I wrote, so for those of you who follow me on Twitter, the 4 of you watching, I don't know if you follow me on Twitter or not, but early in the year, I started doing this gimmick where I'd write down 18 games that interested me every week. And I started calling it #18 games, and kind of stopped that the last couple of weeks because there haven't been. Coincidentally, I actually have 18 games on the list this week. Some big ones, some small ones, some things that fascinate me, which I'll talk about, but we'll get to it. And part of the reason there's 18 is because there are 5 midweek action games tonight. Eastern Michigan, a 7-point favorite at Akron. Ohio, a 2.5-point favorite at Miami. That's up from 1.5. And then Ball State is a 10.5-point underdog on the road at Toledo. That opened at 16.5, which makes me less.
Really? It was 11.5 this morning too, so that's plummeting. So
that number has been coming down. If you watch Brown Bag Bets, Matt went away from his overs and dogs with 1 pick. So tell us why you decided to take. So he took Akron and Ball State, the underdogs, but he took Ohio on the road as a favorite, and confused Tanner Roark and the Rourke brothers.
Yeah, it's tough. I did that earlier in the week in my own head too. I don't know why I wanted to call him Tanner.
I was listening to the show and I was like, you said Tanner Roark, and I'm like, isn't Tanner Roark a baseball player? And it's spelled.
He is not a very good pitcher.
You're a big Ohio fan, I learned.
I've been watching the Bobcats on Maction for quite some time. And if you didn't tune in last week or didn't tune into Brown Bag Bets, Maction, we go underdogs, we go overs. The system went like 11-6 last year, 6-2 in week 1. So we're going to keep riding it, except for Ohio. Ohio is a 1.5 point favorite on the road against Miami, Ohio. The battle for Ohio, even though there's more Ohio teams in the MAC.
All the games are in Ohio tonight.
I love the way Rourke has played this year. He's been really good. He's been really efficient with the football. 21 touchdowns, I believe only 4 interceptions, over 2,000 yards passing. Like, he's just been efficient, and I think that travels on the road. And I think in these MAC conference games, if you have a quarterback that's that much better than the one you're opposing, I think that travels. I think that works more than just about anything. So I like Ohio in a road game, really tight spread. It's not like I'm taking a 7.5 point favorite here. I'm taking a 1.5 point favorite, which is essentially just a money line. So that I lean towards Ohio because they've been the more efficient football team this year, and they have the better quarterback.
So moving on, tomorrow night, action on a Wednesday, Buffalo at Central Michigan, Northern Illinois at Western Michigan. Both of these opened with 2.5 point spreads, and both of the home teams here, so that would be Central Michigan hosting Buffalo, Western Michigan hosting Northern Illinois, are 1.5 point favorites. So
I love Buffalo on the road. Sorry,
yeah.
Reed. I don't think Central Michigan's very good. I love Buffalo on the road. What was the other game? Western was
Northern Illinois at Western.
Oh, what's his name? Is Rocky Lombardi playing for Northern?
I
don't touch it. That's where another place the system could be. You disregard the system if a starting quarterback's out. If Lombardi's not playing for Northern, I'd probably stay away from that one. But we'll see. But likely underdogs and overs, people.
Friday night, I only wrote this down because I'm genuinely curious. Colorado at USC open 31.5. USC's a 34.5 point favorite. And I'm just wondering, as bad as Colorado is, if I really want to lay 35 points almost with a USC defense.
Should you say at SC or
at SC? It's at SC. But I'm still wondering if even there, like, they gave up 469 yards, I think, to Cal. Like, no, Cal's not like dreadful like Colorado, but their offense has been pretty bad.
Yeah, it's not great.
They have 469 yards and 30.
What happened in that? Did you watch a good amount of that?
No,
game?
I was.
Or is that one of those Pac-12 network games that nobody could watch?
No, it was on ESPN, and I was trying to watch it, and I was just tired, and I went to bed.
Fair. Yeah, I saw the score, and I was like, oh, that was close.
Oh, I was actually watching UCLA is what happened. Oh, that's another thing that I needed to rant about for a second, if you'll permit me.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the most interesting issues following college football over the next several years is the lack of centralized injury reporting as networks are partnering more and more with sports books. If you haven't heard, ESPN is trying to pay like billions of dollars to DraftKings, and the rumor going around the gambling space is that they want to put their name on it, which, I mean, DraftKings as a sports book name is terrible because, it was a DFS company. And if ESPN has their name on a sports book, they kind of need to be able to have like the best information possible. And Zach Charbonnet did not play for UCLA, and there was no indication
not a whisper of that at all.
And there was never anything talked about on the broadcast as to why he didn't. Chip Kelly said after the game he tried to go and just couldn't, but no one relayed that information. It's the same thing with Utah the week before with Cam Rising's injury, and FS1 was pissed, and then Utah hit back and said your broadcasters weren't even there. And it's just like, it's going to be interesting to follow because, obviously they have partnerships with, and I'm talking about ESPN, with like ACC, the SEC is going to be their big one.
Doesn't Fox have a Fox Sport? Doesn't Fox have Fox Bet Sportsbook too?
They have Fox Bet. They have their thing too. But like, I don't think ESPN's going to have any Big Ten football anymore next year, right? Like, it's going to be.
I believe that's done.
Fox and CBS. Just an interesting thing that I was thinking about in the kind of the industry that we're in. Nevertheless, we move on to Saturday and just talk about one of the all-time letdown hangover spots. An 11 a.m. kickoff in Fayetteville, Arkansas, as LSU off their big win against Alabama travels to Arkansas to take on the Hogs. Open LSU -1.5. It's out to 3. And if Arkansas, now this could be one of those because it's college football games that I talk about all the time. If Arkansas showed any level of a pulse the last few weeks, I would consider it. But I'm not super interested in rushing to back a team that just lost to Liberty. But I mean, man, all-time hangover spot.
Yeah, just get that game away from me. I don't want to touch it. I feel like that is a hangover spot. I feel like Brian Kelly's teams, as well as they play in November, sometimes are a little bit averse to they're susceptible, I should say, to the next game hangover. I still think they win that game. but that one has potential to just be very sneaky and sweaty, and nobody really needs to get near it.
Tennessee bouncing back from their loss to Georgia, hosting Missouri, open 17.5, out to 20.5. First and foremost, did you see the punt in the Missouri game?
No.
So Missouri Kentucky was punting. I believe that's how the sequence of events goes. They're punting the ball to Missouri. Missouri trying to get the ball back to drive to win the game. They snapped the ball like 20 yards over the punter's head, and Missouri chasing after him completely wrecked the punter and got called for roughing. And I understand the letter of the law, like if you rough the punter, you rough the punter if they're not outside that box. But
yeah,
we got to extend that punter box. Like we got to put it's got to be like, how far back do punters go? Like 15 yards?
Yeah.
Like
12, 15, yeah.
Max like 20, give them like 5 yards of leeway. But if the ball's beyond that, it should be fair game. Just a weird thing. I have this, like, Missouri has been really good at mucking games up and playing ugly against everyone they've played. I'm kind of wondering if Tennessee is going to kind of be on a mission to try to blow people out, because they end the season with Missouri, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt. They don't really have a marquee opponent left, and maybe they just keep winning and hope for chaos around them. But getting some impressive wins, even if the teams they're playing aren't good, like kind of Michiganing it up where you're just beating the shit out of everyone you're playing, maybe makes a case to the playoff committee, like, hey, we bounced back from a bad performance. I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that idea a little bit as we kind of move forward this week.
I mean, yeah, I think that's that's got to be Josh Heupel's message is like, guys, that was a bad loss. We didn't play well on paper. When the committee loves what the scoreboard says, you lost 27-13 on the road to the best team in the country. Like, if that's your one loss, that's your one blemish, and you have this win over, you're going to have 2 top 10 wins, one of which was an absolute blowout on the road against LSU. You still have to spin this to your team. And I don't think it's even spinning it. I think it's telling it straight. You still have as good of a one-loss resume as there's probably going to be out there. So if you go out and win these games by 30 points, like, you're going to be right there. You're not going to have that conference championship point. But if Georgia is the conference championship and your one loss is a 14-point loss on the road, I think you still look really good in the eyes of the committee. So that's the way they have to spin it.
A game that certainly lost a lot of its shine this week, Purdue at Illinois. Both teams coming off of losses. Open 6.5, Illinois a 6.5-point favorite at home. They still control their destiny, though, right?
You know what? I'm going to pull up the Big Ten West standings. I was thrown by loss, then Illinois lost 2. And I have this is great
radio. Big Ten, yeah. So
great podcasting.
4-2. Iowa, Wisconsin, Purdue 3, and Minnesota are all 3-3. Illinois beat Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So if Illinois wins this game, they basically have it clinched, barring something catastrophic.
What happens if Purdue wins?
If Purdue wins, I have no fucking idea.
Chaos ensues. So Illinois pretty much still controls their own destiny.
Illinois controls their own destiny. They're a game up on everyone else in the division.
I think a win for Purdue, then in theory, wouldn't that mean they control their own destiny too? Because they gain a game on Illinois.
They would have they played Wisconsin and Iowa. Now I've got to look that up.
They lost to both those teams.
Purdue did.
Yeah, Purdue lost to Wisconsin. Purdue just lost to Iowa. It was like 24.
So then they would not control their destiny.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm going to have to do research on this and figure this the fuck out later.
It doesn't really matter. Whoever wins that division just getting fed to the Wolves anyways. But yeah, I still am excited to see how it breaks down.
So I'm going to just flip-flop 2 games on my list here. Wisconsin, Iowa. Fuck the 1.5-point total. No one cares about that. 35.5 is the total. You taking the under?
I don't know. Wisconsin's been playing really well offensively. Yeah. Really well for Wisconsin. But they've been a much better team under Jim Leonard. And I don't know what's going on with Iowa, but they've scored a few more points lately. So maybe 35 points a little bit too high. They've scored 24 plus points in each of the last 2 weeks. Iowa doesn't really do that. So I don't know if I'm touching this total.
And you said the winner of that game gets fed to the Wolves. I'm trying to find something real quick because this is more bad radio.
Probably.
Gets fed to the Wolves. Speaking of those Wolves that you are talking about, Ohio State hosting Indiana. This opened a 31.5-point favorite, and I don't know where it did because I wish I had seen that number. It is now out to 40.5, and I'm going to give you a hot take right now. I think you probably need to play Indiana if you're getting 40 points in this game.
I would probably lean so too.
Ohio State was missing 13 guys of various quality in the Northwestern game on top of all the weather stuff. They're really banged up right now, and realistically, they just need to get healthy for the Michigan.
Yeah. I mean,
And
that's what you're seeing from them. You'd like to see them play better, but like you said, they're holding guys out. Both of these teams, unfortunately, with the way their schedules have set up this year, outside of the Penn State game, they're pretty much just playing a one-game season. And
right.
It's unfortunate that that's the way the Big Ten is shaken out this year, and that's not going to be the case every year. But just kind of, it's been a perfect storm of Big Ten being a little bit down after those two teams, and these two teams kind of lucking into a little bit of an easier schedule. Like when Michigan State isn't a big deal, when Penn State even isn't all that great, the Big Ten East schedule isn't going to be all that fantastic. It just hasn't been this year. So Ohio State has that luxury where they have the benefit of the doubt from the committee. They don't have to really play for style points. They just have to beat Michigan. I mean, even if they lose to Michigan in say they lose in like a very close game, won in overtime, they still have a pretty darn good chance of sneaking in a playoff too.
Maybe Ohio State first half or first half over in that game, and then go from there. 40.5 is a lot. Alabama, they are on the road again at Ole Miss. Opened Alabama 8.5. It's out to 11.5. I don't think LSU. I don't think Ole Miss is as good as LSU. They clearly weren't. They got beat pretty handily by them. But like Alabama, double-digit favorite on the road again. Now Saban really likes to try to beat Lane Kiffin. I understand that. Man, that's a lot of points. I'm not touching it, but I just thought
too many points. Yeah, too many points for me. I'll happily tune into that one on Saturday at 2:30. That's the 2:30 game, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Happily tune in and watch it, but that's not one I'm touching. I just did. Alabama probably the rest of the way this year for me, with the exception of maybe a bowl game, is probably just a no play.
Michigan laying 28.5 at home against Nebraska. It's an interesting number. That's a lot of points. I'm interested to see if Michigan doesn't fuck around in this game the way they did with Rutgers. Michigan has done this thing this year a couple of times where they're just like kind of not sloppy. It's just like Michigan just kind of lets the team hang around, and then they just like, okay, we're done with you. They play with their food is one of my favorite phrases with college football teams. They've done that a bit. I don't know. I just thought 28.5 is a lot there.
It's a lot of points. Michigan probably covers it if I have to bet, but I think you wait for maybe like a halftime and see if you see Michigan get off to that slow start. And if it's 17-10 at halftime, then maybe you grab whatever Michigan's live line is.
I put this on here because, like, congratulations, Mario Cristobal. You're a 1.5-point underdog at Georgia Tech. Like, congratulations.
I wanted to get to that one because I knew we weren't going to in the recap because obviously the epic week we had in college football, and Phil might have to bring this one up on Thursday too because of hashtag his Knowles. But holy hell, we were talking. I mean, Phil's, and we didn't think it was a bad one. Phil's preseason bet was Miami to win the whatever their division is in the I'll forget which one's which, but their ACC division, it doesn't matter. Their ACC division, like it was like plus 190, and he bets like, kind of like that. There was Tyler Van Dyke Heisman hype at the beginning of this year. Not very smart Heisman hype, but like there were legitimate places saying, oh, dark horse, all that. They flat out stink. They stink. And shout out to Florida State and Mike Norvell, because I was a guy even beginning of this year, end of last beginning of this year. They lost the kid, the cornerback Hunter, who committed Jackson State, played for Dion, and since then Florida State fans seemed like they were turning on him. It seemed like it could go very south for him very quickly, and it has gone the absolute opposite way. That team really buys into him. There's a clip going on of him coaching up the kid that committed the personal foul and kept going and like very respectfully kind of getting in his face, calming him. Like that guy has won over that team. It seems like he's getting that program back on the right track. And hopefully he can get that team back to Florida State being a consistent top 15, team in college football, because the ACC needs it. And college football is a lot more fun when, Florida State night games are an awesome environment, big time thing.
Yeah, they had the 3-game losing streak in the middle of the season against Wake, NC State, and Clemson. They were dealing with injuries. They're getting healthy.
Yeah.
There. Syracuse, I don't even have it on the list. This week they play at Syracuse. But like if they finish, they can beat Syracuse. They should beat Louisiana. They should beat Florida State at home. If they go 9-3 this year, that's a hell of a job by Norvell. When a lot of people thought he was in serious trouble. Also,
including me.
The last thing, for sure. The last thing I'll say on this: Trey Benson, 15 carries, 128 yards, and 2 touchdowns for Florida State. He was recruited to Oregon by Mario Cristobal. Suffered a knee. He didn't really get to play a ton early in his career, and then suffered a knee injury, which basically cost him all of last year. And then after the game, or like yesterday or something, Cristobal said, "Oh, well, we know how good of a player he is. Like we recruited him. That shows what we can do because we recruited him to Oregon." I'm like, dude, you're taking credit for a kid kicking the shit out of you. Like, what are you doing? There's no one who I think I'm like sicker of than hearing hype about Mario Cristobal as coach. Nevertheless, Georgia, off their ass kicking of Tennessee, they head to Stark Vegas to play Mississippi State. They opened an 18.5-point favorite. That was too rich for a lot of people. They are down to 16.5. Again, it seems like this is a bad spot for Mississippi State. Georgia's defense showed they can rush the quarterback. They don't really blitz a ton. Like, this just kind of seems like one of those spots where I think it's going to be difficult for Mississippi State to score on Georgia. If they struggle to score on Alabama, I don't know how to score on Georgia.
Yeah, I think Georgia, I mean, this is something like LSU were talking about a letdown spot. I think Georgia already had their letdown spots, and they're the team that just kind of uses a moment like that to gear up and go for the rest of the year. And you talk about how well Georgia tackled in the Tennessee game. Mississippi State, they put up big, flashy passing numbers because they throw all the time with Mike Leach. They're not a team that throws the ball deep all that often. They're the team that's going to try and small cut you to death with 5, 6, 7-yard completions. And if Georgia's making all their tackles, then that's just not really going to work all that well. And if they get to the passer and put Will Rogers under pressure, it's just not going to work very well. As long as that stays under 17, I like Georgia.
All right, so hold on. This is again bad radio.
No, it's okay.
Because now I have to go look at this. You talked about how they don't throw deep. I'm trying to bring up the average depth of target. Yes, so I was correct. Will Rogers, Zion Turner of UConn, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, which is a little surprising to me, are tied for 91st or last in the country amongst quarterbacks with at least 230 dropbacks at average depth of target, 6.2 yards per throw.
Dorian Thompson-Robinson's a little bit surprising, but I guess that's kind of what they do.
Yeah, and they don't really have a deep play threat. Like their best receiver is Bobo, who's the guy who they throw the ball around the line of scrimmage. So to your point, like if Georgia is just going to want to keep everything in front of them anyway, and that's what Mississippi State does, it seems like it's going to be very difficult.
It's like a terrible matchup for
to move the ball for them. Couple of massive total games. Oregon hosting Washington. Oregon's a 13.5-point favorite, but the total there, 72.5. If this game were in Washington, I would love the over in this game, and I still kind of do, just because Oregon is not going to
Oregon could put up 50.
Washington's not going to stop Oregon in this game, and I think Washington can score enough that will get there. And then North Carolina, Wake Forest. Wake Forest is actually a 3.5-point favorite at home, 76.5. I probably have that backwards. Let me double check that.
That terrifies me because there have been a couple games the last couple weeks where we've been like, what does Vegas know? Why does Vegas want us to take that line? And they've all worked. They've all been begging. They've all been right.
think it's just a matter of nobody trusts the North Carolina defense at all.
Yeah.
One thing
they let Virginia's offense look good. One
thing that concerns me, that was alarming. Sam Hartman's thrown a lot of interceptions the last 2 weeks.
I don't know what's happened. They've gotten just slapped.
Well, they played a great defense last week in NC State. Thoughts on the total, and then I got to rant about NC State.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on the total? 76.5. Do you have the guts?
Yeah, of course I do.
You do? You're going to play it?
Of course I have the guts. That's going to be 50-45.
I love it. Shout out to NC State, who almost threw their season away playing a transfer quarterback from Charleston Southern who was very, very not good, instead of MJ Morris, a true freshman who was a pretty decent recruit, not like a huge recruit, but like a top 25 quarterback recruit in the country. Cost them the Syracuse game where they did not score a touchdown, and then it took them until the third quarter of the Virginia Tech game to finally replace the quarterback and put MJ Morris in. Their offense is actually maybe better this year with MJ Morris than it was with Devin Leary for whatever that reason is. But he's been efficient throwing the ball. He hasn't turned it over, and they're going to play great defense, and they're probably going to get to that 10-win mark that they so wanted last year. And then I promise I didn't do this on purpose. I didn't even notice this until just now. But the last game on my list, the biggest game of the weekend. Oh, actually, not the biggest game of the weekend because I forgot to put this on my list this week.
Notre Dame Navy?
I'm just going to tell you I'm going to implore you all, UCF at Tulane. Tulane's a 2.5-point favorite. Watch that game. Watch Tulane.
That's going to be a fun game.
That's going to be fun. That's a 3:30 game. I will actually put that on the big TV over Ole Miss, Alabama. But the College Game Day will head to Austin. I called it the College Game Day. I was going to call it the College Game Day site. College Game Day heads to Austin, Texas for the second time this year.
This can be a fun one.
TCU brings its undefeated season into Austin against Steve Sarkisian and, more importantly, his special assistant, defensive assistant, Gary Patterson, former TCU head coach. Texas opened 7-point favorite, and they are a 7-point favorite in this game.
What does Vegas know?
Here's what Vegas knows, okay? Texas, this number's a little high, but Texas opened a pick'em against Kansas State, and they opened 7 against TCU. So the implication on the road at Kansas State, at home against TCU. So that's so it's basically saying they thought that Texas was 2.5 points better on a neutral than Kansas State, and it makes it. And the implication is they're 4.5 points better than TCU. So that's saying Kansas State's 2 points better than TCU on a neutral, which I don't buy. Here's the crazy thing. Not the crazy thing. Here's the biggest thing for me. Before I make a decision on this game, I need to know what's going on with Quentin Johnston's ankle. Johnston, excuse me. He apparently he twisted it 2 weeks ago and was not 100% against Texas Tech, re-aggravated against Texas Tech, and left the game, did not return. Their offense just did not look as good without him. Their offensive line did not look great in that game. And we know that TCU has had some issues defensively all season long. So we'll go more in depth on this game on Thursday, but if Quentin Johnston is not 100% in that game, a lot of that sets up for Texas 7 feels right. Like Texas was up 31-10 on the road at Kansas State and needed a fumble in the fourth quarter to keep from blowing that lead. Like that's the Texas experience. So are you going to get the team that was up 31-10? Are you going to get the team that tried to blow a 31-10 lead?
But they're better at home. They've played better at home.
Sort of. I mean, they didn't play well at Ohio State, but
that's fine. That's fair. But I think everyone in the world kind of saw that one coming.
All-time hangovers.
All-time letdown spot. That line tells me, and we talked about earlier in the show, how teams don't have to announce injuries until the opening kickoff. That seems like a line that Vegas is kind of hedging its bets that Quentin Johnston might not play, and it's their form of kind of having a little bit of insurance against people that think he won't, and get teams getting Texas at 4, 3.5 or whatever. But this tells you everything you need to know about what Vegas thinks about TCU, especially a team that might not have Quentin Johnston. Their offense hasn't looked nearly the same without him, and even with him, they kind of. I don't want to call it a fluke because I don't think it's a fluke, but they've caught some breaks, and I think they're bound to stop catching some breaks. I think Sark, say what you want about him. No, you're not the biggest fan, but he's gotten his team ready for big games, and they've played pretty well in big games. And this is a top 5. Again, say what you want about quality. A number 5 team in the country coming into Austin, Texas, with Texas having a chance to, I think, take over first place in the Big 12, if I'm not mistaken, right?
They have 2 technically TCU would still be ahead of them because Texas has 2 conference losses, but
fine. Big 12 championship bid still on the line.
Basically puts Texas now we've got to do this again.
Still puts Texas, I believe, either at top or tied atop the Big 12 in a chance to play a Big 12 championship game. They lose this one, they're out. So this is a huge game, and Stark has coached better in those games.
Believe it or not, they're not out if they lose.
Oh God!
TCU,
like we all predicted, the Big 12 was just cannibalizing itself.
Yeah, TCU's 6-0, Baylor's 4-2, Texas is 4-2, Kansas State's 4-2, Kansas is 3-3, Oklahoma State's 3-3. So God. Texas still has to play Kansas and Baylor. So if they win those 2 games, they could conceivably lose this game and still go to the Big 12 championship game. That's under the assumption Oklahoma State loses another game because they're also 3-3 right now. But the way things are trending for them
they're
right now,
not going to beat Oklahoma the way they're playing.
It would appear as if Oklahoma State's best days are behind them. Another thing worth mentioning that factors into this line a little bit that I forgot to bring up, D. Winters, who was the best defensive player for TCU, got a targeting in the second half of the Texas Tech game. So he's going to be out for the first half against Texas. 4.5 sacks, 8 tackles for a loss. The best player for a already shaky defense out for the first half of that game on the road is a pretty massive loss for TCU. So maybe some Texas first half might be a play in that spot. We will find out there.
I think I like a Texas first quarter. They've been good on those opening drives.
They have been.
The script against Alabama was, like you said, when Sark has time to, plan out the first 2 drives and not have to worry about the other teams doing, just go on script. He's been really good. So a Texas first quarter. I don't know. Maybe we'll see. We'll see.
First quarter points per game. Texas is 19th in the country. TCU better. But
Really?
TCU's been really good early in games too.
Fair enough.
So
Maybe first quarter over.
Maybe first half over in that game.
All right, we'll talk. We'll talk on Thursday.
We'll see what happens. A million different ways to approach that. But man, that was a good show. We talked a lot of ball. We talked 18 games. We only recapped like 5, but some good conversations. College football, as we know, it has changed. And we are now headed for the final few weeks of the season. Very interesting. We have teams in the Big 10. We have teams in the Big 12. We have teams in the Pac-12 still alive. We didn't even get to the idea of what happens if Michigan loses to Ohio State close. One last line I will talk about, because FanDuel has it up now, and I am in love with it. I'm not going to bet it until week of, but they have Michigan an 8.5-point dog at Ohio State. And as long as there are no major injuries for Michigan heading into that game, I will be betting Michigan. I will take the 8.5 all day, even on the road.
Yeah, I think so.
In that game. So that one's out there. I wouldn't bet it now because obviously a lot can happen with injuries between now and then. If McCarthy gets hurt, if Corum gets hurt, like a lot can happen. But I don't know if, barring injury, I don't know what's going to happen between now and then that might make us change our opinion of where those two teams are. So
yeah, I think that's
one that's out there. At least that kind of seems to indicate where that line's going to be when we get to the final week of the season. But if you don't have anything else, then we can wrap this bad boy up.
Let's call it a show. We'll see you guys on Thursday with Phil back.
Yeah, Phil will be back on Thursday. We will get into the slate of games. We will have off the radar games. Mine's probably going to be that Washington game. And we will have our full betting cards for Matt. I'm Dan, and we will talk to you on Thursday.